Welcome, travelers. We're aware that your journey was difficult, but prepare to have your questions answered, for you have been granted an audience with the Masters.
And welcome back to the Masters of Modern podcast. I'm your host, Alex Kessler, joined today by my co-host, Ben Bateman. What's up, everybody? Wait, what's going on? Where's Kessler? Why is Bateman both Kessler and Bateman? And the deal is, guys, today is a solo episode. Kessler is out of town. He's foraging in the wilderness for things. He's doing things that aren't here recording this show. And we felt that it was a strong opportunity to share one of our Patreon Brew episodes. We take exclusive submissions from you guys, and we then share your submissions on the show, and we do like little sort of like deck tech things with our ideas, what we would add to them. So that is today's episode. Next week, you can expect our Kaladesh set review. We're both very excited. Kessler just played in the Grand Prix, so he's got all kinds of things to share with you. Or I'm sorry, he is playing in the Grand Prix this weekend. He'll have all kinds of things to share with you from that. So all our insights into Kaladesh, we have all kinds of fun things we want to share with you. But today, I'm going to be doing this episode, ending with finally my personal brew that I've been talking about for the last couple of weeks with Sahili Ray, the new red-blue planeswalker from Kaladesh, which I just think is awesome. And I have a very cool modern deck that I want to talk about. So in the meantime, guys, I'm going to do 3 brews submitted by fans. I'm going to tech them, and then I'm going to share mine. And I'm going to start you guys out by reminding you that, of course, the podcast, The Masters of Modern, we are on Twitter. So you should follow us at theMMcast. Of course, also, I am personally on Twitter at Ben Bateman Media and Instagram. And Kessler, my co-host, who is not here, is at Kess Wiley. You can find him on Twitter, and the MMcast also. We're on Facebook. We have a YouTube channel where we put up all the episodes now. We share them with usually a video component that shows the cards we're talking about, things like that. So that's really cool. And last but not least, of course, guys, these Patreon decks, they come from our Patreon, which is funds that have been donated to us by you to help us keep the show going. Things like buying new microphones, paying a video editor. These are things that come out of the Patreon. So go to patreon.com/theMMcast if you guys want to donate and help us stay in business. It is very cool if you do that. So, I think without further ado, we are sold out. I've mentioned this several times, but I think we are now sold out officially of the DMTW collaboration playmat. We've been working with DMTW Clothing, an awesome lifestyle brand. These guys make great stuff. If you go to dmtwclothing.com, you can see their stuff. But we had a playmat that was for sale on there. It was our first product with them. And unless I'm mistaken, it's now sold out. But you can check it out because I'm sure it's still pictured on there. And we probably will be making more at some point. So anyway, guys, without further ado, let's get into the episode. So first and foremost, I'm going to take a submission from Adam Hartman. So Adam Hartman wrote, here's the very first modern deck I tried to brew a few years ago. I was in love with Nykthos, still am. Got the inspiration to use Impromptu Raid from a PucaTrade.com article. The basis of the deck is to try to get very early devotion to green, then use Ramp, Nykthos, and Impromptu Raid to have massive single turns of creature damage. A massive single turn of creature damage. So for those of you that don't remember what Massive Raid is, it was one of those hybrid enchantments from Shadowmoor, I think it was, and it cost 4. It's a hybrid green-red and 3, and it states, I'm going to read it right now, Post-Mortem Lunge. That's not the wrong card. That's not what that card was. Post-Mortem Lunge is the wrong card. Impromptu Raid. I hope I didn't just say Post-Mortem Lunge for both of them, because that's not what we're talking about at all. Impromptu Raid is a hybrid red, green, and 3 for an enchantment with an ability of 2 and hybrid red, green. Reveal the top card of your library. If it isn't a creature card, put it into your graveyard. Otherwise, put that card into play. That creature has haste. Sacrifice it at end of turn. So this deck is basically built kind of like an Elves deck. I'll explain what's going on here. We have Impromptu Raid as a 4 of. The deck runs 6 ley lines, green ley lines, which are 4-drop green enchantments with 2 green and 2 colorless as their cost, that if they're in your opening hand, they begin the game in play. So this helps, obviously, when you get Nykthos in play. Having double green devotion to start the game is very good. So you play 4 leyline of vitality and 2 leyline of life force. Then it's got a kind of like an Elves base here of 4 Elvish Mystic, 4 Llanowar Elves. You have 4 Voyaging Satyr, which is to untap Nykthos. You have 2 Elvish Visionary, 4 Burning Tree Emissary, 2 Karametra's Acolyte, 2 Garruk Caller of the Beasts, 2 Garruk Wildspeaker, and then a suite of one of kind of powerful creatures. So a Kalni Hydra, Nylea God of the Hunt, one Crater Hoof Behemoth, an Emrakul, the classic OG Emrakul, and a Hornet Queen, plus a single copy of Bow of Nylea, and then 4 Nykthos and 17 Forests. So it's a 21 land modern deck, and then a big sideboard, it looks like, of one-ofs. So my first thought on this deck is that in Modern, if you're going to do something creative, the first question you have to ask yourself is, if I'm going to do this and I'm going to try to be clever and creative and groundbreaking, is this better or worse than something that is being done differently already? And this is a pretty similar idea in terms of just like big mana take over the game in 1 or 2 turns as Elves. It even runs like some of the Elves cards. This is obviously going to be less expensive than an Elves deck because you don't have to deal with like super expensive Heritage Druids and things like that. But overall, it's not too different. I would say the ley lines are kind of aggressive because they're very dead draws. The card Impromptu Raid, I'm not entirely sure has a home in Modern, but maybe. I mean, the coolest thing about this deck to me is it's kind of like one of those things in Modern. Like if you can just get past the sort of like wall of disruption that's going to start the game out and actually get this thing working, it can go totally bananas. Because I'm looking at this and thinking to myself, okay, you get your devotion off of each of the mana dorks, plus the ability to tap them for a mana during that same turn. Any mana creature that you flip off of Impromptu Raid then has haste and can tap for additional mana. Your Voyaging Satyr, if you flip it off of Impromptu Raid, can then untap Nykthos instant speed because it has haste to reset the turn and continue going. Your Garruk Caller of the Beasts, for those of you who don't remember like which one Garruk Caller of the Beasts is, he's the big fat one that allows you to reveal cards from the top of your library and get creatures into your hand. I'll read his text exactly. He's the M14 one. So he's green 4 for a 4 devotion. +1, reveal the top 5 cards of your library, but all creature cards revealed this way into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Or -3, you may put a green creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. And then he has a -7. You get an emblem that whenever you cast a creature spell, you may search your library for a creature card and put it on the battlefield. So obviously, if you can get his ultimate off, you're in business, but it takes a few turns. I don't think this deck ever really intends to get the Caller of the Beast's ultimate. But I can see this deck doing some pretty awesome stuff. So my first thought is, like, how goofy do we want to get, right? I look at this and I see, okay, Bow of Nylea is a 1-of. Feels a little loose. It's just a 1-of, so like it has the whole devotion thing and it gives you some utility, but ultimately it's probably not a necessary card. I'm looking at the ley lines, and the ley line that gives your creatures +0, +1 is very strong, but ley line of Life Force, or whichever the other one is, one of them gives all of your creatures +0, +1, and you gain a life every time a creature comes into play. And then the other one states that your creatures can't be countered. I believe Life Force. Yeah, Life Force is the one where your creatures can't be countered. So that's the one there's a 2 of in here. Vitality is pretty sweet because like you get a lot of creatures in play, so you gain the life, and it gives your guys an extra toughness on the butt. So you just have like a better way to block and things like that if things get out of hand. My first thought would be, okay, what are some cards that aren't being played here that are pretty cool that you can do fun things with? So right off the bat, I see you're playing 8 mana creatures and 4 Burning Tree Emissary. So I see the opportunity for at least a single copy of Mirror Superior in this deck. I know I talk about that card a lot, but it's a 5/6 on turn 2 that if you play a Burning Tree Emissary on turn 2, you just get your Mirror Superior, so it's totally fine in your opening hand a lot of the time. It's going to be a turn 3 5/6 in a lot of cases because you're going to have 2 mana creatures. If you're going to do that, there's a card called Magus of the Vineyard that I think is interesting, and I don't think sees any modern play, but I could actually see being kind of interesting in this deck. What it is a 1 green 1/1 from Future Sight. Some of you probably have never heard of this card because it's really weird and I think would be characterized as terrible in a lot of cases, but I think is interesting. It's a human wizard for 1 green that's a 1/1. At the beginning of each player's pre-combat main phase, add green to that player's mana pool. So what's interesting about this card is, let's say you're on the play, you play it, and they now all of a sudden they're going to play a land, and they're going to add green to their mana pool. So they're going to get 3 mana on turn 1. Now some decks will punish you for that. in some cases, let's say a Jund deck or an Abzan deck will maybe have a filter land and be able to turn that green into a turn 1 Liliana. That's pretty interesting. It's a turn 1 Tarmogoyf and Thoughtseize for a Jund deck. Like, that also seems, very good. On the other hand, there's a lot of fringe decks in Modern that giving them green will maybe accelerate their game plan, but won't be crushing. It's not going to destroy you. Oftentimes, affinity decks, for instance, they're going to cast their whole entire hand by turn 2 anyway. So giving them 3 mana on turn 1 is like, fine, you're a turn faster, but you're also going to then untap and be able to have 4 mana on turn 2. Decks like Storm, there's a lot of decks that can't use the green. Like, they have very, very specific costs. A lot of Grixis cards don't use any, they have very little colorless mana. They won't be able to use the green. So it's kind of an interesting turn 1 thing, and I was thinking, depending on how sort of like deep you wanted to go on the Superion plan, because I think Superion's pretty good in this deck. Like, if you're going to go with, it obviously doesn't have the devotion you want, but I think it's definitely an interesting card if you wanted to try to shave things to make room for. The cards in here that jump out at me as being like kind of wonky are, okay, let's see. The 1 Bow of Nylea is probably unnecessary. Maybe the 2nd Garruk Caller of the Beast is a little unnecessary. The Elvish Visionaries are fine, but like, you don't have an engine to loop them, so they're just kind of something you can do to draw cards early. The 2 Laylout of Life Force are a little loose. Depending on how deep you wanted to go on impromptu raid, I could see going down to 3 of those maybe. I would probably just try to make this deck a little bit more, like, have a little bit more game, which is why I kind of like the idea of having that Superion. Eldritch Evolution is an interesting card in here too. If you want, let's say you wanted to run 1 Superion. Eldritch Evolution is an interesting one because it allows you to turn 1 Elvish Mystic, turn 2 Eldritch Evolution into Superion. So it's another way to turn. It's another way to get a turn 2 5/6, which is obviously strong. I don't know if the composition of this list currently, you would be wanting to like run a lot of evolutions, but I could see if you had like more 4-drops in here that you wanted to play, maybe instead of running Wild Speakers and Caller of the Beasts, you wanted to play like some power 4-drops. That might make your Eldritch Evolutions on turn 2 like pretty sick. I don't know. Those are just thoughts, but those are the things that come to mind with this deck. I think ultimately if you wanted to be competitive in Modern, you would probably play Elves instead of this, but I could be wrong. This is definitely harder to foil than a basic Elf strategy if it gets going. It's just got a lot of sort of odd choices. On the other hand, I think it's awesome. And I can imagine just like playing against Impromptu Raid and being just like so happy to lose to that because it just seems like awesome. So that's my first deck that I'm teching. Thank you, Mr. Adam Hartman. I appreciate you submitting your stuff here. That's really cool. We always like to get these. So I'm going to move on to deck number 2. And that is going to be a Goblins deck that was submitted by Mr. Let's see, Jacob Goodman gave this one to us. He's sad that the Gremlin subtype is not helpful for brewing Goblins. He suggested that perhaps Blossoming Defense would be one of the cards from the new set that would make this better. So I'll kind of tell you guys what's going on here. This is a modern Goblins brew. He's called it Mama Tarka's Goblin Pile. All right, here we go. You got 4 Foundry Street Denizen. You got 2 Gore Clan Rampager. That's the one green, 1 red, 2 colorless for a 4/4 trample, and then it has Blood Rush, where for a green and a red, you can discard it to give target attacking creature +4/+4 and trample until end of turn. This card was like a total powerhouse in Limited. It became a favorite in Standard, and there was a period of time in Modern where there was this like all-in Gruul deck, and this card was played as a 4 of in that deck. I think it's a pretty underrated card in terms of its power level. Like 2 mana for +4/+4 trample is good, and the fact that it's also a 4 mana 4/4 trample, if you just draw it later, is totally solid. So that card's good. I don't know how like good I think it actually is in a Goblin deck, but we'll see. You got 4 Goblin Bushwhacker, 4 Goblin Guide, 3 Goblin Pile Driver in the main deck, 4 Legion Loyalist in the main deck, 4 Mog Fanatic, 4 Mog War Marshal, and then you have 19 lands, 12 of which are fetch lands, and 4 Atarka's Command, 4 Lightning Bolt, and of course 4 Goblin Grenade. So aggro decks in Modern that are like this composition of colors are, you have Atarka burn decks that sorry, not Atarka burn. You have, well, I guess Atarka burn because of Atarka's Command, but they're often Naya burn as like one of the popular ones that you see, where they play Helix and they have a couple copies of Path, and then they also have Atarka's Command in the deck. That's fairly common. You also have, there are just like the Naya Zoo decks that are very popular with Tarmogoyfs and Wild Nacatls and things like that. A lot of the same cards. And then the other 3 color burn decks are the black, red, green burn decks that play, like, I think they play Bump in the Night. So that's, or do they play green or do they play white? Either way, there's a version that plays black. I think there's actually 4 maybe, because I've seen some of the 4 color ones, but they play Bump in the Night for a reason, to have late game reach. However, Goblin decks like this that are aggressive, this is like, it's different than mono red, just like your straight burn decks. Tries to take advantage of, obviously, Goblin synergies. My first question here is, Atarka's Command is really, really, really good, and it's especially good. Its final mode. I mean, I think everybody knows what this card does, but it's green, red for an instant. Choose 2. Your opponents can't gain life this turn. Atarka's Command deals 3 damage to each opponent. You may put a land card from your hand on the battlefield, and creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain reach until end of turn. So, the creatures get +1/+1 and gain reach is usually paired with 3 damage. That's like a pretty all-in normal aggro thing in Modern. It's like a card that is just built for aggro decks. But getting 4 of these and making a Goblin deck green, I'm not really sure is necessary, because Gore-Clan Rampager is super sweet, but like there's a lot of things you could be doing keeping your deck mono red that I think are pretty good. The first thing I would say is I think you want the full 4 pile drivers in the main deck. I don't know why you would really want to play 3 of them. It's one of definitely the stronger goblins. If you were going to cut the green, I could see a scenario where you wanted to main deck Blood Moon. I think that's pretty clever. I've seen, like, I mean, it depends on what the season we're looking at is, but there's definitely a lot of situations in Modern where if you get like Blood Moon early, like let's like a lot of this deck is 1-drops, right? You're playing 4 Foundry Street Denizen, 4 Bushwhacker, 4 Guide, 4 Legion Loyalist, 4 Mog Fanatic, and so that's a lot of 1-drops. So what's going to happen is a lot of your turns are going to be 1-drop, turn 1, 1-drop, 1-drop, turn 2, and then you're going to have like maybe cards enough to play more than 1 spell on turn 3, but a lot of the time you won't. So let's just pretend you had 3 Blood Moons in your main deck. I could totally see a situation where it's like turn 1 Guide, turn 2 Legion Loyalist and Foundry Street Denizen or something, or maybe it's a different order. And then like your opponent's like, all right, cool. I'll play my 2-drop. And then you're like, all right, untap, Blood Moon you. And they just like look at their hand and they're like, oh my goodness, my whole strategy to survive this is now gone. I can't play any of these cards. And the turns it takes them then to stumble and try to figure out a way to get rid of it is enough time for you to win. So I can see that being pretty interesting. I noticed that in your sideboard you don't actually have Blood Moon, which probably needs to change whether or not it goes into the main. You can definitely construct a mana base with this deck with how little green you need to just turn all of your fetches into mountains. I don't think it really matters. So that's a very real thing. Other cards that I think are interesting, if you're going to go the green route and you want your green to give you some reach with the Gore-Clan Rampager, something interesting that I think could be thought about, and this is not necessarily like the gospel, but I think it's like a pretty interesting idea, is that people aren't really playing Hooting Mandrills in Modern. This is a 19 land deck that plays 12 fetch lands, 4 Lightning Bolts, 4 Goblin Grenades, and 4 Goblin War Marshals and Mog Fanatics. So, and those are just the cards that you're going to get into your own graveyard. Let alone the fact that if you're an aggro strategy, your guys will be removed. Like, any guy bolts your guy, like guy blocks your guy, like you're an aggro deck, you're kind of all in. So I could also see a situation where it's like 1 drop, 1 drop, 1 drop, and then it's like turn 3, 2 drop, play your pile driver on turn 3 or something, or maybe another War Marshal, and also exile your graveyard and cast like a 1 mana Hooting Mandrills. I don't know that I would recommend Hooting Mandrills on a lot of decks, but this deck looks like it's going to be fairly all in fairly early. And if you're going to play Rampager anyway, part of me kind of thinks like getting the versatility of Rampager as a combat trick is great, but I also, if I can just get Rampager as a 1 mana 4/4 with trample, that seems sweet. Maybe that's wrong. I don't know, but those would be the first thoughts that come to mind for me. Drinking some water there, guys. Thanks for going through that with me. Aside from that, I think this looks like it's pretty much doing the right thing for Goblin decks. They continue to print Goblins. There's a lot of Goblins that like don't see a lot of modern play that I'm always kind of curious. I'm always kind of curious that like, will we see X, will we see Y show up in modern? I mean, for instance, like Rabble Master is a really powerful card that hasn't really shown up in modern with any kind of consistency yet. I've seen people try it, but it was a total standard powerhouse. It's a 2/2 for 3 that you get a 1/1 with haste that's a goblin, and the next turn, like it attacks and gets +1/+0 for each other attacking goblin. I mean, this thing has to be killed immediately. Otherwise, like it's just like a power 3-drop. I mean, it does get lightning bolted, obviously, but I mean, Rabble Master's pretty good. And then you have like, who's the double strike mythic from Lorwyn? Not Lorwyn, from Zendikar. He's called Goblin. Warren Instigator, I think. Is that the name? Warren Instigator. That sounds right. Yeah, here he is. Red for a 1/1 double strike. Whenever Warren Instigator deals damage to an opponent, you may put a goblin creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. Like, this deck plays a lot of cheap goblins and is probably bad, but it's another one of those things where, like, goblin decks haven't been that explored in modern yet. They just, like, people haven't really messed around with them that much. They show up occasionally as kind of fringe contenders, but if you were going to play a strategy that was, like, a little bit less just, like, all-in swarm on those, on those 2s, or maybe a few less 1-drops, you could play, like, a couple War Instigators, and you could play some Rabble Masters or things like that, and you could even play like a single copy of what's it called, Siege Gang Commander, maybe. Like, I can imagine that guy hitting and getting like a Siege Gang Commander and like a Rabble Master on the table and just like staring down your opponent with just like death eyes. I don't know. Those are probably bad ideas for a Goblin deck. I think this is a little closer to what a normal Goblin deck wants to do, which is all in attack and swarm. But yeah, I guess my first recommendation on this is probably that Blood Moon needs to be in the sideboard. Could be in the main deck if you wanted to lose green. And if you're going to play green, there's definitely some other things that are clever to think about. Though Atarka's Command is pretty nuts. So, moving on to the next deck submission. Thank you so much for the submission. I really, really appreciate that, Jacob. That was very fun. I don't get to talk about goblins in Modern a whole lot. So, here we go to Dave on Carlo's deck. So, Dave says, I've messed up posting this to the right spot every time I've tried to get a deck tech on it. Here's my Bubble Hulk combo deck. Claims it can go off on turn 3 pretty consistently and turn 1. So this is a real deck in the sense that this has been a fringe, like a tier 2 deck for a while. For those of you that don't know how it works, I will explain it. It's basically a situation where Protean Hulk, the card Protean Hulk reads, and I think Protean Hulk costs like 7 maybe. Let's see here. Protean Hulk. It costs green 5 for a 6/6 beast. When Protean Hulk is put into a graveyard from play, search your library for any number of creature cards with total converted mana costs 6 or less and put them into play. Then shuffle your library. So the whole entire deck is built around the interaction between Protean Hulk, the card Body Double, which is 1 blue and 4 colorless for a 0/0 shapeshifter. As Body Double comes into play, you may choose a creature card in a graveyard. If you do, Body Double comes into play as a copy of that card. And there's an interaction with Revelark, which is 1 white, 4 colorless for an elemental flying 4/3 creature that can be evoked for white and 5. And the reason that the evoke cost is higher than the regular is because Revelark reads, when Revelark leaves the battlefield, return up to 2 target creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, as you are probably imagining, the goal is to get Protean Hulk into a graveyard to reanimate a body double or cast a body double, hard cast, to be a copy of Protean Hulk, and then, or just cast a Protean Hulk, and then you have to have it die. So that's why you play 2 copies of Viscera Seer in the deck. There's a copy of Mog Fanatic, 3 Jace Vryn's Prodigy. Then your spells are 3 Pact of Negation, a Lightning Axe, 4 Faithless Looting, 4 Serum Visions, 2 Izzet Charm, 2 Taigam Scheming, 4 Footsteps of the Goryo, and 3 Makeshift Mannequin. 19 lands. So what happens here, guys, is that once you have a Protean Hulk die, you go through your deck and you search for copies of creatures convert a mana cost 6 or less and put them into play. So you have Body Double enter the battlefield, and also Revelark enter the battlefield, and also Viscera Seer enter the battlefield. And what that allows you to do is then sacrifice your. And then Body Double comes in as a copy of Protean Hulk, so then you sacrifice Body Double. There's a whole complicated minutia of things where you repeatedly return your copy of Mog Fanatic and kill them a billion times with it. It's the way the Body Double thing works. I'm kind of tired right now, so I'm looking at this and trying to piece it all together, but I've died by this plenty of times in both Modern and in Highlander, and that is the reason you have a single copy of Mog Fanatic, is because you're recurring the combo over and over again. Body Double having 0 power means that it can be searched up as a 0 cost part of the resolution. The Protean Hulk sacrifice, and then Revelark dying can obviously bring things back. So that's the way this all works. So you can sort of see that the rest of the deck is set up to take advantage of getting things out of your hand, because this version of the deck plays 4 Footsteps of the Goryo and 3 Makeshift Mannequin. So Footsteps of the Goryo, because instead of a lot of resurrection effects, Footsteps of the Goryo reads 1 black, 2 colorless, sorcery, return target creature card from your graveyard to play, sacrifice that creature at end of turn. A lot of resurrection effects in Magic state that when the creature dies, it exiles. This is great because you can Footsteps of the Goryo, a Protean Hulk. Protean Hulk comes in at end of turn. If it doesn't get pathed, the combo goes off. So Makeshift Mannequin obviously has multiple sort of interactions with the deck, because it's not just like your standard sorcery speed thing. You can instant speed, reanimate Protean Hulk, block with it, or something like that. I mean, there's a lot of pretty cool stuff you can do with it. Some of the cards in here that are a little different that I'm used to seeing. Taigam Scheming, I understand why. 1 blue, 1 colorless. Look at the top 5 cards of your library, put any number of them into your graveyard, and the rest on the top of your library in any order. I can see it as a 2-drop. It stacks your deck and puts the right things into your graveyard. It is card disadvantage, which is a little annoying, but so there's a lot of the things in this deck. The Izzet Charm looting effect, the Faithless looting effect, those are all card disadvantage. So, and then Pact of Negation to protect you. So, yeah, this is, like I said, this is a harder one to go in and immediately deck tech, because this is a strategy that works, that I've seen work. Few things. Let's see. Perhaps rather than Izzet Charm or Taigam Scheming, I would play the new card from Kaladesh. What's it? Something Reunion. It's called. I'm going to tell you guys right now. It's the new card that everybody wants to play in Dredge. It's called Cathartic Reunion. It's 1 red, 1 colorless. As an additional cost to cast Cathartic Reunion, discard 2 cards, draw 3 cards. It's very good in Dredge. It's very good in this. It allows you to early, for 2 mana, discard things you want to get out of your hand and draw 3 cards. It seems totally fine to me. Seems very powerful. This deck doesn't play a whole lot of interaction. Plays a single Lightning Axe as a removal spell slash discard outlet, which is fine. Izzet Charm is a loose removal spell. It's burn on turn 2 for a creature. It's a shock, but it also doubles as a card draw thing. I would probably replace the Taigam Schemings with Cathartic Reunions. I would probably go down to one less copy of Makeshift Mannequin because it costing 3 mana, or costing 4 rather than 3. And also the fact that Makeshift Mannequin can only target creature cards from your graveyard means it's not as versatile as like, I don't know, some other cards where you can get something out of your opponent's graveyard. Yeah, I mean, the 3 Pact of Negations in the main deck, they're fine. You know, they're dead spots if you're not playing against... They're dead spots if you're not playing against the right deck, which is a little annoying. Though this deck is really fast, so I can understand why you'd want like packs instead of spell skites or something like that. So yeah, I mean, it plays 3 Jace Vryn's Prodigies. Like, you probably could just play 4 Jace Vryn's Prodigies. I don't know. I don't really know what the point of playing 3 of that card is. It's like very, very, very good, and so much of this deck just wants to be digging that I kind of think, you know, go up to a 4th Vryn's Prodigy and cut the Tygam Schemings, go down to 2 Makeshift Mannequins, put in Cathartic Reunions. Maybe it's tough on Lightning Axe. Like, I guess Lightning Bolt's not just like better in every deck, but it's also hard to look at any deck list and not just be like Lightning Bolt should just be in this deck. I don't know. You know, Spirit Guide, understandably, you want to go off fast. Totally get that. And yeah, I mean that pretty much does it on that deck. This deck I kind of wonder if because it's all in on the strategy that it's fairly easy to interact with after game 1. Any kind of like graveyard removal effect early, you know, this deck doesn't do well with. Obviously you can bring things in, but like this foiling this, like this doesn't exactly have a different game plan. Something that could be really interesting because you already run the Pact of Negations in the main deck. If you have a single Slaughter Pact in the sideboard, is you could sideboard into the Hive Mind combo. You have a lot of deck manipulation and card draw that I kind of wonder if there would be a version of this deck that could just play the Hive Mind combo that used to be so popular in the Amulet decks. Hive Mind being blue, and 4 for an enchantment that states whenever a player casts a spell, the player's opponent copies that spell. So what it means is you can play Hive Mind and then immediately attempt to cast like Slaughter Pact on their creature, and then like counter your own Slaughter Pact with a Pact of Negation, and then they have to pay, you know, and lose, or they lose the game because they have to pay for the trigger before you ever have to pay for the trigger. So that's a thought. It might be bad. I see the sideboard here has like copy of Grave Titan, some Leyline of Sanctities, a Murderous Cut. I just see like a lot of the same kind of all-in type of things here. And if you get rid of, if you change the composition of this deck a little bit, you could cut like 8 cards and just swap in the Hive Mind combo easily. And that could be your game 2 in a lot of cases. So that's a thought. In any case, those are my thoughts on that deck. So Dave Uncarlo, thank you for submitting it. I wish I had more constructive things to offer you in that category, but it's you know, that when decks are tournament ready decks, they're a little harder to critique. But I think that deck is sweet, and I like it, and I enjoy playing it. So last but not least, guys, I'm going to get on to my own brew here. I mentioned this last week on the podcast, or perhaps it was the week before, talking a little bit about Sahili Ray, or Rye, whatever we want to call it, because I think it's super, super sick, and I have been brewing, trying to figure out the best version of the deck. So I'll kind of tell you guys what I have going on. My brew is not entirely done. I don't have a version that I like yet, but it's getting there. So the first interaction that I saw was the interaction between Sahili and Tezzeret. And that's because even though Sahili turns things into artifacts, what I saw was that I think Tezzeret, Agent of Bolus, and Sahili both interact exceptionally well with the Wellsprings from Mirrodin Besieged, I think one was Mirrodin Besieged, and the other one was New Phyrexia. So you have they're both 2-mana artifacts that state when they enter the battlefield something happens, and when they put into a graveyard from the battlefield something happens. So Ichor Wellspring is you draw a card when it enters and when it goes to the graveyard, and Mycosynth Wellspring is you search your library for a basic land when it enters, and again when it hits the graveyard. So my first thought was, okay, Sahili, turn 3, after you play a turn 2 Wellspring, if you have a sack outlet of any kind on turn 1, you can then obviously get, like, it just turns those cards into, like, pretty sweet 2-mana draw spells. Also, I liked the idea of playing Tidehollow Sculler in this deck. I think Sculler on turn 2 to set up your turn 2 Sahili, and then again, if you have that same turn 1 sack outlet, it allows you to make a copy of Tidehollow Sculler, look at their hand, and then sack the Tidehollow Sculler to your turn 1 sack outlet so that the exile effect is permanent. So Greater Gargadon is obviously the card that comes to mind. It's a really, really interesting card to have on turn 1 in a deck like this, because it means that once Sahili is on the battlefield, if you ever see the opportunity to go for it, and you can sacrifice your entire board to put Gargadon into play as a 9/7 haste, and then -2 Sahili to make a copy of Gargadon, which also has haste, an attack with 2 9/7 hastes. You can win completely out of nowhere. So it's 1 red for a spend 10 9/7 beast is what Greater Gargadon is. Its casting cost is red and 9. Sacrifice an artifact, creature, or land. Remove a time counter from Greater Gargadon. Activate this ability only if Greater Gargadon is suspended. So obviously you can't sacrifice enchantments and things like that, but pretty much everything that in this deck that I'm thinking about could be sacrificed to it. So then the rest of the deck. So a couple other things. Sun Titan with Sahili is really, really good. If you have a Sahili in your graveyard and you play one and you have a Sun Titan, you can go infinite, because Sun Titan enters the battlefield, you then minus Sahili to make a copy of Sun Titan, which then enters the battlefield, returning the Sahili from your graveyard, which then Legend rules out the first one, and then you minus to make another copy, so on and so forth. You go infinite, get infinite Sun Titans, and attack for 1 billion damage. So you have the ultimate combo win built into the deck. Trying to figure out the other things that make this deck work. I don't know anymore if Tezzeret, Agent of Bolas, is actually good. I think I have him in here currently as a 1-of, because he seems like a perfectly fine thing to curve out to. Just like makes a lot of the artifacts that the deck's going to play good. It turns your Wellsprings into 5/5s if you need him to. Searches for... I have 4 Arcbound Ravager in the list currently. Ravager obviously a little bit awkward casting cost wise, but works really, really well with the Wellsprings. Allows you to get full value out of them. It's another sack outlet for you to play a Sculler and sacrifice the Sculler to the Ravager so they don't get the card back. It's just another way to get value out of your artifacts. I've messed around with a lot of other things. And Soul Artifact is something I thought about, because I think that this deck wants to play like a pretty aggressive, like Mishra's Bauble, Mox Opal kind of a deal with a really, really low mana curve. I think you really want to have artifacts in play as early as possible for your Ravager and things like that. Especially if you're going to have Tezzeret, like having Tezzeret and being able to play like Mishra's Baubles in the deck. So when you plus Tezzeret, you just search. You can always hit a Bauble. You can always play a Bauble, and it's always going to turn into a card draw. I don't think Sahili, like copying a Bauble, makes a whole lot of sense. But I mean, again, it's sometimes that's going to be better than plus oneing and scrying and dealing a damage. Like it's just -2s her to draw another card. So if you do the Mox Opal kind of Mishra's Bauble version of the deck, then I think in Soul Artifact is totally reasonable. I don't know. It's it's a little loose, especially because you can't sacrifice the Soul Artifact to the Gargadon, which I don't like. But this is kind of where my idea started to stall out. I think Hangerback Walker is a really interesting 2-drop in this deck. Obviously, Walker interacts exceptionally well with Arcbound Ravager. And then the tokens that the Walker makes are really, really, really good with Gargadon. So you can if you have like a Hangerback Walker with 3 counters on it, you sacrifice that and all of the tokens, and you're halfway there on a Gargadon almost. Like, that's pretty explosive. So I'm not really sure if that's the correct move. I don't think playing 4 colors is hard at all, especially because of like Mox Opal and the fact that so many of the things in here are artifacts. You're going to be able to cast most of the things in your hand off of almost nothing. Like Mycosynth Wellspring, especially because it allows you to search for basics. One Mycosynth Wellspring in your opening hand, and you can fix almost your entire mana base. Like based on whatever's in your hand, it's pretty stupid. So you'd play like one of each basic that you needed. Lands, I was thinking you'd play an Academy Ruins, probably a single copy of Flagstones of Trocare because you can sacrifice it to the Gargadon and search out a duel. There was a lot of other things that I thought about in here that I thought were interesting. Early on when I was building it, I was like, okay, if I'm going to play the Tidehello Scullers on turn 2, it might be really interesting to play like another disruptive 2-drop creature. So I was thinking like, okay, what about either what's the enchantment creature from Journey to Nyx? What the heck's it called? Brain Maggot. I think that's gotta be what it's called. I'm looking that up right now. But yes, Brain Maggot. That's the one. So Brain Maggot's the same card, obviously, as Tidehello Sculler, but it's not an artifact. The issue with playing Brain Maggot instead of Ravenous Rats, and neither of them have made the list currently, but I've toyed with both, is that I think there's a version of this deck that kind of like just like disrupts. And playing a turn 2 disruption creature like that and then following it up with a Sahili was like, okay, so you're kind of just going to grind your opponent out. And I thought that the idea of playing Ravenous Rats was kind of clever. I don't really anymore. That's why it's not in the main deck. Mirror Retriever is another card that I think could be good, if you want to like sacrifice, playing like your Sculler and then sacrificing Sculler, so this in your graveyards, then you like play a Mirror Retriever and sack the Retriever to get back the Sculler, play the Sculler. I think there's like some pretty cool stuff there. I considered Keldon Marauders maybe as a 2-drop because Marauders on 2 followed by Sahili on 3 was like also seems pretty good. Marauders triggers when it enters and when it leaves the battlefield, so a turn 2 Marauders into a turn 3 Sahili means that on turn 3 you're going to attack for 8, or I guess you'd attack for 6, but you'd get an additional 2 out of the copy of Marauders. So it seems like pretty aggressive and interesting if you wanted to come up with any kind of recursive thing to bring back your Marauders. Slag Fiend, another card if you're going to go aggressive on sacrificing artifacts. The card is good. The card is bad in general. I don't think Slag Fiend is playable, but it was an idea. Relic of Progenitus, if you don't want to go with kind of a recursive thing. It's another artifact that you can play early, make copies of to draw cards, but also has like a very utility effect. So that's kind of the stuff that I was thinking of with this deck. This is kind of unrefined, so if you guys come up with ideas that you think are cool and you want to submit them and let us know, I totally want to hear what you have to say, because I think there's something really cool here, and maybe the correct thing is just to go for the Sun Titan play, and that's just what the deck should do, but I definitely think that there's like something pretty cool that can be done. So I recommend checking it out and letting me know your thoughts. So yeah, that pretty much does it, guys. That is the Brews episode. That does it. So thank you for tuning in to the solo me talking at you about Brews. I hope this was fun. I hope you guys don't miss Kessler too much. But if you hated it and it was not your thing, I'm sorry, and please, tweet at us and let us know that, because we probably won't do a solo episode again if this didn't fly. That pretty much does it. So check out the Twitter, guys, at theMMcast. I'm at Ben Bateman Media on Twitter and Instagram. You can share your thoughts, please. If you like any of these brew ideas, if you have questions about anything, tweet those at me at the podcast. You can find Kessler at Kess Wiley, and at the MMcast that is the podcast Twitter. Please check us out on Facebook, YouTube. That's where we are posting these videos. There'll be like a video of this probably that has all the card images, or at least some of them, that Mike Clary, who's our buddy, who's awesome and an editor that we have been able to hire because of the Patreon. So go to the Patreon, patreon.com/theMMcast. And that is that. Please check out our sister podcast, The Command Zone. They're on rocketjump.com as of now, and also on YouTube. So Jimmy and Josh do awesome Commander content. They are the best. So we'll see you guys with our set review next week. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you had fun. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for your attention. For further inquiries, send an email to theMMcast@rocketjump.com. See you later, alligator.